Let's have a look into the chapter-wise contents of Process Piping Code ASME B31.3. In this episode we will be exploring various chapters of ASME B31.3 Process Piping Code 2016 edition. ASME B31.3 2016 edition of the Process Piping Code is divided into 10 chapters, along with dedicated chapters covering all the aspects of process piping, code and text appendices also. However, in this tour only chapter-wise contents will be presented. So, let's begin the tour. First chapter of ASME B31.3 titled Scope and Definition has a single paragraph, para 300. This paragraph provides general statements for the identification, responsibilities, intent of the code, determining code requirements and code cases. Subparas of this paragraph: scope of the code, definition of various terms, nomenclature and status of the appendices. Chapter 2 is dedicated to design, and spans from para 301 to 322, spread across 6 parts of this chapter. Part 1 of this chapter comprises of conditions and criteria. Part 2 of this chapter: pressure design of piping components. Part 3 of Chapter 2 constitutes fluid service requirements of piping components. Part 4 deals with fluid service requirements of piping joints. Part 5 comprises of flexibility and support requirements. And finally, Part 6 of Chapter 2 contains specific piping systems detailing instrument piping and pressure relieving systems. Chapter 3 of ASME B31.3 2016 edition of the code details about the material requirements for process piping. This chapter illustrates the material aspect via its paragraph detailing general requirements, that is para 323, and few miscellaneous aspects in para 325. ASME B31.3 contains listed materials, which are simply those that are included in the allowable stress tables and those that are permitted in component standards listed in Table 326.1. However, the designer is not prevented from using other materials. ASME B31.3 only lists materials in more common use. In addition, the designer is not generally prevented from using a material at temperatures for which allowable stresses are not provided. Rules are provided in Chapter 3 for qualification of unlisted materials and for use of materials outside of the temperature limits for which allowable stresses are provided. Chapter 4 of the Process Piping Code refers to the standards of the piping components for dimensions and ratings in its single paragraph 326. In addition, it provides a table listing various component standards. Those piping components that are in accordance with the standards listed in this Table 326.1 are referred as listed piping components. Metallic pipe and tube listed in Appendix A of the Process Piping Code are also considered to be listed components, as they are included by Note 5 in the Table 326.1. Other components that do not comply with those standards are considered to be unlisted components. Listed components are manufactured in accordance with standards that have been reviewed and accepted by the Code Committee for use in ASME B31.3 piping systems. Next, Chapter 5 of the details fabrication, assembly and erection requirements of process piping. It spans from paragraph 327 to 335, stating requirements in general, requirements for welding and brazing, preheating, heat treatment, bending and forming, brazing and soldering. Assembly and erection requirements. Currently in 2016 edition of this code doesn't have para 329 and 334 in its Chapter 5. Chapter 6 is dedicated to inspection, examination and testing requirements of process piping. It spans across para 340 to 346 in continuation, covering detailed paragraphs on inspection, examination, examination personnel, examination procedure, type of examination, testing and records. These first 6 chapters of the code are what is called as the base codes. It provides the basic piping code requirements for normal and Category D fluid service metallic piping. Here what we saw is that paragraphs in the code follow a specific numbering scheme. Paragraphs are designated in the 300 range. The 300 series paragraphs are exclusive to the ASME B31.3 code section of the ASME B31 code for pressure piping. The paragraph numbers in the base code are repeated in chapters 7 through 9, and we will see this in forthcoming chapters. Before proceeding further, let me remind you that to learn, understand and test your skills on the process piping code, you can download the Android application ASME B31.3 Process Piping Quiz. This application is not only for chapter-wise quizzes but also provides the elaborate answers to various process piping related questions. Understanding and application of the concepts, rules and requirements ASME B31.3 Process Piping Code is a must in process piping. With the regular practice of these questions provided in this quiz app makes you well versed with the process piping code. Now let us proceed with rest chapters of the process piping codes. Chapter 7 contains rules for non-metallic piping and additional requirements for metallic piping lined with non-metals. It lays down the rules via its 10 parts elaborating conditions and requirements. Pressure design for piping components. Fluid service requirements for piping components. Fluid service requirements for piping joints. Flexibility and support. Systems. Materials. Standard for piping components. Fabrication, assembly and erection. Inspection, examination and testing. Altogether, paragraph-wise this chapter on non-metallic piping and metallic piping lined with non-metals spans from paragraph A300 to A346. It shall be noted here that the numeric value of the paragraph numbering is same as that from chapter 1 to 6, that is 300 to 346. The only difference in numbering procedure is that prefix A is attached to each paras and subparas of this chapter 7. If requirements located elsewhere in the code apply to these piping systems, they are referenced by paragraph in chapter 7. The behavior of non-metallic piping is more complex than that of metallic piping, and the design criteria are significantly less well developed. As a result, designers are left to use the best judgment in many circumstances.
For metallic piping lined with nonmetals, the base code requirements for metallic piping are applied to the metallic portion. Supplemental rules are provided for the nonmetallic lining. Chapter 8 contains rules for piping in Category M fluid service. The rules in Chapter 8 of ASME B31.3 are used when the owner designates a piping system to be in Category M fluid service. The owner is guided in the classification for the piping system by the definition of Category M fluid service in Chapter 1 of ASME B31.3. This definition is the code rule relative to classification. A guide to the application of these rules is provided in ASME B31.3, Appendix M, which contains a flow chart to assist the owner in classifying fluid services. This chapter is divided into 20 parts. First set of 10 parts, that is part 1 to 10, corresponds to metallic piping, while next set of 10 parts, that is parts 11 through 20, corresponds to non-metallic piping and piping lined with nonmetals. These parts again similarly lays the requirements for Category M fluid service by elaborating conditions and requirements. Pressure design for piping components. Fluid service requirements for piping components. Fluid service requirements for piping joints. Flexibility and support. Systems. Materials. Standard for piping components. Fabrication, assembly, and erection. Inspection, examination, and testing as in Chapter 7. Here two paragraph numbering starts from 300 to 346 from part 1 to 10 and part 11 to 20. The only difference in the numbering of paragraph is that paragraphs pertaining to metallic piping are prefixed by letter M, while for non-metallic piping, that is part 11 to 20, is prefixed by MA. Rules for high-pressure piping is laid down in Chapter 9 of the Process Piping Code. Chapter 9 of ASME B31.3 only applies when the owner specifies its use. It shall be noted that the definition of high-pressure fluid service simply requires that the owner specify use of Chapter 9. Some guidance is provided in paragraph K300A, which states that high pressure is considered to be pressure in excess of that allowed by the ASME B16.5 PN 420, Class 2500, rating for the specified design temperature and material group. This is not a requirement, and the base code may be satisfactorily used at pressures higher than ASME B16.5, Class 2500 rating. However, the base code rules become increasingly conservative and, in fact, impossible to use as the pressure approaches the allowable stress. By the same token, Chapter 9 may be used at lower pressures. It has been used with high-strength steels with pressures as low as 28,000 kPa, that is 5,000 psi. This rules in this chapter is laid down in 10 paragraphs titled same as that for the Chapter 7 and 8 stated earlier. Newly added last chapter of the 2016 edition of Process Piping Code is High Purity Piping. This again states the requirements in 10 similar termed parts from Part 1 to 10. In these first 10 parts it lays the rule for the high purity piping in fluid service other than Category M. For Category M fluid service piping, Part 11, which is the last part of this chapter, is dedicated. In this chapter, paragraphs from Part 1 to 10 begins from U300 to U346. For Part 11, it is UA300 to UA345. With this concludes the overall chapter-wise tour of ASME B31.3 Process Piping, 2016 edition. After this elaborate tour of ASME B31.3 Process Piping Code, 2016 edition,
let me once again remind you that to learn, understand and test your skills on the Process Piping Code, you can download the Android application ASME B31.3 Process Piping Quiz. This application is not only for chapter-wise quizzes, but also provides the elaborate answers to various process piping related questions. Understanding and application of the concepts, rules and requirements ASME B31.3 Process Piping Code is a must in process piping. With the regular practice of these questions provided in this quiz app makes you well versed with the Process Piping Code.